Hey there everyone, AJ back again for the Mighty Gluestick channel. I make videos about Dungeons & Dragons lore full-time and have a collection of over 700 videos on monster ecology, fantasy world history, character classes and magic items on my channel. If you like what I do, please consider becoming a member of the channel by clicking the join button down below or backing me on Patreon, where you can get access to all of the scripts I write for these vids. Members of either also become members of the Secretive Gluminati on my Discord server, and of course subscribe to me here as I upload at least twice a week and have a live stream every weekend. The origin and evolution of dragons on the world of Toril is largely speculative, and sometimes it's difficult to pry facts out of fiction and folklore, particularly as the dragons themselves have a very long history of spreading their own doctrine and mythology according to their own unique culture. But there is some physical evidence, and in this video I'll present the version of their origin which is backed up by fossils, written accounts from other ancient civilizations, and so on. First, there is the Eo Draco, the Dawn Dragon, in the ancient language of the Saruk. Now, this is a very long time ago, and the face of Toril looked very different to how it does now. We know very little for sure about the time before the Days of Thunder, when the great glaciers retreated, revealing a massive supercontinent called Ouroboros, with the rest of the world covered in an unbroken ocean. At this time, there were no elves, no dwarves, no orcs, no gnomes, no halflings, no ogres, no goblins. However, there were primitive humans, more ape-like than they are today. There were other species, now gone, such as the Quaggoth, who once dominated a large portion of the surface world long before they were forced to retreat into the Underdark. There were the Thunder Beasts. This is Toril's version of dinosaurs once found on Earth, but they were and are not the same. The Thunder Beasts of Toril are much more advanced biologically. The bulk of them now can be found only in isolated areas of the world, such as the jungles of Chult and the deep woods of the Frozen Far, where one of the Uthgard barbarian tribes has one as their spirit totem. Much more dangerous than the Thunder Beast was the evolution of the cunning and fearsome Eo Draco, which according to information taken from incomplete fossil evidence was similar in form and appearance to present-day wyverns, but with an average length of 35 feet and a 50-foot wingspan. Where do these things come from? Their skull case was less in volume than a wyvern, but so they were nowhere near as smart as a modern dragon, but certainly smarter than any Thunder Beast, and they could fly. Perhaps they were a divergent species of Thunder Beast poised to take over the top predator role, but the natural course of their evolution was mysterious and interrupted by a global catastrophe called the Tearfall. Much like planet Earth, cosmic events saw the planet plunged into a month-long thick fog that blanketed everything, followed by 7 consecutive years of winter. This was also known as the First Sundering. I'll transcribe the short version of what this was, taken from a panel that convened at the 2012 Gen Con, and I quote, 19,000 years ago, in the Forgotten Realms, hundreds of elven high mages came together at the gathering place to cast a mighty spell. The spell that would create a new elven homeland where the elves would live in peace and safety from the forces of Lolth and Malar and the other evils which threatened them. The spell succeeded, more or less, creating the Isle of Evermeet within the trackless sea far off to the west, a green and pleasant land where they could live. But Evermeet was born out of a tragic catastrophe. Such epic magic was beyond the control of even those most powerful of high mages, and even as this new land was born, the old supercontinent of Faerun, which means the one land in Elven, was torn apart into different continents. So now only the largest of them retains that name. There was one High Elven mage, Eliandreth of Orishar, who had not taken part in the creation of Evermeet and therefore didn't die in the process. But he was monitoring the high magic through the magical weave and detected that the magic was so potent it actually rippled forwards and backwards in time. So Eliandreth saw that 2 other Sunderings had taken place, one in the past, one in the present, and one in the future, and he wrote them down in what became regarded as a prophecy. The first Sundering he described is known to historians as the Tearfall, and it happened 32,000 years ago, when the world was dominated by the creator races and humans were primitive ape-like beings living in caves. One of the creator races was an amphibioid race called the Batraki, and they were embroiled in war against an army of titans. Desperate to save themselves in this losing battle, they cast a mighty spell of their own, and they woke several primordials from their slumber. As the primordials started to rise up and rampage across the world again, the gods quickly came to confront their ancient foes, and a battle which no mortal race had seen the likes of began to wage in earnest across the face of Toril. The forces of nature were thrown around, the ground ruptured in earthquakes, tornadoes tore apart forests, and raging wildfires turned the remains to ash. Then, as the battles reached their climax, a primordial known as Asgarath, the world shaper, whom the dragons called the creator of the multiverse, took one of the ice moons orbiting Toril and smashed it into the planet's surface, saying that if the primordials could not have the planet, no one could, and that would have been the end of all life on Toril. But then the overgod Ao stepped in and said, no, this world is not going to be destroyed, and he created a twin of it called Aber, and said that world was for the primordials, and Toril was for the gods, and thus it's been ever since. We know this occurred because the recordings of the ancient reptilian creator race called the Saruk reported the time called the changing of the stars, where the planets were actually moved around. On Toril, Asgarath's attack did not leave the planet unscathed. Far from it. Continents were torn apart and the world was devastated. The four inner seas merged together to form what is known as the Sea of Fallen Stars. The dramatic climate change that followed spelled the doom of the Batraki Empire and gave rise to the dominance of dragons. Scholars have long called this event the Tearfall and speculated that a comet or perhaps ice moon fell from the sky and dealt this damage. But it wasn't until the return of Aber and the Spell Plague that the supernatural significance of these events became clear, as well as the fact that the artifacts Ao created, called the Tablets of Fate, were what this separation of the two worlds, the primordials and the gods, the forces of law and chaos, were anchored by. And so the Tablets of Fate are supremely important to the first Sundering and the balance which exists to protect all mortal life on the world of Toril. The reason the High Elven magic caused such astounding damage was because of the many similarities to the power that Ao unleashed to create the original Terran reality to form the twin world of Aber. In effect, the elves tapped into that raw power, and the resulting disaster nearly ended them all. It certainly killed millions of people on the surface world when the continent was torn apart, including thousands of elves, mainly because the elves lacked the artifact that could serve as a focus, like the Tablets of Fate do, and that's part of the reason the spell ran out of control and dealt the devastation that it did. Now, I won't go into details of the theft and destruction of the Tablets of Fate and the Time of Troubles and the Spell Plague and the return of Aber, or the third Sundering where Ao put things back the way they were and returned Aber and Toril back apart again, ushering in the 5th edition as we know it today. What we are focused on is the rise of the dragons. Proto-landworms were already starting to dominate the world in the days of Thunder, and they managed to survive the disaster of the Tearfall. This is where we see the time when the first proto-dragons appeared. There were many scholars who still believed that the fall of the ice moon brought dragons from outer space to the planet's surface, and they hatched into the proto-dragons. But given the largest difference between proto-dragons and true dragons is the elemental power and ever-increasing might and high intelligence of the true dragons, it seems clear enough that there was something deeper that took place in these eras of incredible conflict, and that's backed up by historical record. First, one may ask, did the Batraki forcefully attempt to evolve the first landworms into a much more capable beast to fight against the Titans before the Tearfall? And then, in the era of the unleashed primordials, when the Batraki civilization was obliterated, did those landworms spread out into the wild to become the most formidable living creatures on the face of the planet? Consulting the grand history of the realms, we learn that one of the last creator races, the Aerie, being described as a humanoid race with both avian and draconic features, faced a massacre inflicted on them by a force of 1,000 Lamassu, a race you don't see much on the prime material plane these days, but was certainly around on Toril back 30,000 years ago. The Aerie took the landworms and started an intensive experimental breeding program, and the result was the first of the winged landworms, which the Aerie named Wyverns, which they rode and used as weapons of war. It's very interesting that this also gave rise to the species of Eurodraco, which where the line of the proto-dragons comes from. The higher intelligence and ever-increasing size of the proto-dragons was the genesis of a new dominant species, and when the Aerie got into a conflict with the demon lord Yenogu, their civilization was further ripped apart by the demonic wasting plague, causing them in desperation to turn to another demon, Pazriel, for salvation, even as Yenogu summoned legions of Marashi demons to destroy their decimated population and ravage their crops. So, born of desperate conflict in a world at the mercy of magical and elemental forces, bred with the concentrated essence of both the most powerful predators of the natural world and the very spark of intelligence by the Aeri, the Ignidraco became the new intelligent species with their own beliefs, politics, and ambitions. Who did they see as their creators, though? Was it the struggling remnants of the demon-infested Aeri Empire? Not at all. In fact, the dragons would spell the ultimate doom of that creator race, along with the cost of dealing with the hordes of the abyss that they inflicted on themselves. No, they turned their attention and faith to the most powerful being they could think of, the primordial who had the power to smash the world apart with one blow. They turned to Asgarath and named him the creator of themselves and all things. With that worship, there came another remarkable evolution of this magical species. They suddenly gained much greater elemental power, and the ever-increasing size of their species was matched by an ever-increasing primal elemental power within them. They developed a religion and a pantheon, and the Ignidraco were the first to speak and write their own draconic language. In time, they became 4 distinct races. From the Ferodraco, we get the line of the metallic dragons, and from the Infisidraco, we get all of the chromatic dragons. This also is where the gem dragons and lung dragons split off from the original line. As for the original Ignidracos, they still exist in the world, though a shadow of their former majestic size and power. They still have plenty of attitude at times, but if you ever happen to meet a pseudo-dragon, you are face to face with one of the most ancient branches of the draconic family, their tree, the little fire-belching ancestor of all dragon kind. From the line of the first wyverns, we get the hundreds of varieties of drakes and the tiny wondrous fairy dragons, who change colours as they age. But these are all lesser dragons. The pseudo-dragon, wyverns and drakes don't grow ever increasingly large and powerful as they age. Even the fairy dragons remained quite tiny, though they do seem to have as many stages of maturity as full-size dragons. The metallic, lung, gem and chromatic dragons are what is known, and the planet dragons, are what is known as the true dragons. Because they don't get weaker or more frail with age, they just get larger and far more formidable. So there we have the evolutionary history, as good a theory as any other, for the many breeds of draconic creatures. Now this is where dragon religion and conflicts of their own take over the history of their species. The genocidal war with the giants, their own religious civil war thanks to conflict between Tiamat and Bahamut, the rise of Bahamut's dragonborn, the counter-warfare of Tiamat's spawn, including the little kobolds, the fiendish Abishai, the rise of interbreeding with other races, the first of the dragon-blooded sorcerers, and the dizzying array of dragon species. In this remastered series on the dragons, I'll be looking at each one in the usual detail you've come to expect from my channel. There are a lot of dragons, as you would expect from a game with their name in the title. Dragon physiology and mentality is incredibly diverse, but there are some common traits that unite them. Dragons are large. They grow gradually over the course of centuries into some of the largest living creatures in the multiverse. Ancient dragons can make a mockery of the stone walls of a castle built to withstand armies and siege weapons. Dragons are highly intelligent. Even the dumbest of them is still on par with the average human, and they still have sensory abilities far beyond a human, which makes them an apex predator of other intelligent species. They are greedy and extremely arrogant. Even the most gregarious and benevolent dragon is still very unlikely to give over its possessions without a very good reason, and they do not take insults very well at all. Most dragons can fly, most can breathe out a destructive force or substance. Usually this is powered by elemental energy that suffuses their entire body, mostly concentrated in their blood and the marrow of their bones. They are very durable, predatory creatures who tend to live alone most of the time, and a lot of their social hierarchy is based on age, size, and power. Rivals, more often than not, settle their differences through lethal combat, and no matter how gentle and civilized a dragon may be, they still enjoy hunting, killing, and devouring live prey. Even if they can survive fairly well without even needing to hunt and consume other living creatures, they still want to do it. Dragons prefer to dwell in lairs. They feel a deep drive to collect a valuable hoard of treasure and rest on or near it for long periods of time. They are an egg-laying species and hatch with the ability to speak, read, and hunt for themselves. Dragons do believe, quite correctly, that their true destiny is to completely dominate any planet they exist on. This destiny has been impossible for them to achieve in the world of Toril, however, because of the ancient elven high magic that created the Draco Rage mythal. But ever since 1373 DR, some 119 years ago, the Archwizard and Lich at the time, Samaster, creator of the first Draco Lich, ended the Draco Rage mythal at long last, paving the way for the return of the Draconic Empire. We have yet to see how this is going to play out, but the first stirrings of what is to come has been seen with the rise of the cult of the dragon and the stirrings in the ancient civilization of the giants. Sooner or later, this is going to explode into a global conflict not seen on Toril for 20,000 years. Please hit the like button if you made it this far, subscribe if you like what I do, check out my Patreon for some exclusive content and all the full scripts for these videos. Absolutely go use the link below to sign up for Viewer Prime with my promo code AJPickett to get a 5-day free trial and access exclusive streaming content including the Lingerie Wrestling League and an ever-expanding selection of my best content with advanced access to the latest videos and the same exclusive content Patreons and paid channel members have access to. Buy some of my sweet merchandise, wear your geek with pride, and as always, thanks for listening and I'll be back with more for you very soon.